Fernando Alonso is rumoured to be contemplating his retirement after an announcement was made that the 2026 Aston Martin car will determine how much longer he stays within the sport of Formula One. Now, obviously, Fernando Alonso has had a tremendous Formula One career so far to date, with his first Grand Prix being before I was even born, Australia 2001, and him still competing in 2025. That is 24 years of Formula One racing. Yes, he did spend a couple of years away, but ultimately he spent a long time of his life within the Formula One paddock. Over the course of that 24-year spell, 410 Grand Prix, 413 involvements, though those 3 races he did not start. He's had 20 different teammates, 6 different constructors, 5 different engine builders, 32 wins, 22 pole positions, 106 podiums, and 2,339 points. Now, when it comes to Fernando Alonso, we know how important it is to have the right car underneath him. We've seen when he does have a car that can compete, he is a very, very competitive driver, just like a lot of the drivers on the grid. I think if you spoke to any one of the 20 drivers, they'd say, if you give me a good car, I will compete for race wins, compete for podiums, compete for championships. I think there's probably 10 of the current 20 on the grid that would probably say if they were in the McLaren, they'd win the championship. And I don't necessarily disagree with a lot of them, in my opinion. I think what you've got to do, though, is you've got to look at Fernando Alonso and his age. Obviously, 43 years old right now. When his contract at Aston Martin does expire, he will be 45 years of age, which, with obviously the new introductions at Aston Martin of Adrian Newey and the Honda Power Unit for 2026, there's obviously the huge rule overhaul, which changes the aero, it changes the engines, and I think that is really important for Fernando, that Aston Martin get it right and get themselves at least battling for podium, so that he's got something to put his faith in, because obviously at the moment, Fernando Alonso and many other drivers on the grid who are towards the back end of their career still believe that they are fast enough to win races. They still believe they're fast enough to sort of push themselves further forward, as they have done over the course of their entire career so far. And as Fernando Alonso says, the stopwatch will also tell him when he doesn't feel fast enough. And I think this season has probably been one of Fernando Alonso's worst starts to a season, like, to date. And obviously he had that McLaren year where the McLaren was god awful. And for me, I believe that, not that Fernando Alonso is a bad driver, but I've never thought he's as good as many people make him out to be. I do think he's a very good driver. I think he's very competitive, and I think he could certainly, if you put him in the McLaren, I think he'd wipe the floor of Lando. Oscar, I think, would be a 50-50 shout in their current circumstances. But for me, the big question really has to be is, if you were to put him in the Red Bull against Max Verstappen, or the Ferrari against Leclerc, against Hamilton, would he be able to beat them? And I think the worst thing that happened to Fernando Alonso was Lewis Hamilton. Fernando Alonso went into McLaren as a double world champion and got beat by a rookie. And there's going to be a lot of people in the comments talking about Hamilton being favoured this, Hamilton doing that. Now, at the start of the season, Hamilton was not favoured, but was still putting in equal performances with heavier fuel loads, with worse strategies. And then obviously Fernando Alonso is the reason why that relationship broke down at McLaren, because of the way he dealt with things. And obviously there's the news about the brown paper bags that were being handed out around the McLaren garage so that they'd help Fernando Alonso and move from Hamilton's side to Alonso's side. And obviously, these are the sort of things that have happened to Fernando over the course of his 24-year motorsport career at the top level, in which I believe that he's at the centre of pretty much his own downfall for a lot of it. He's made a lot of poor decisions. He's moved away from a lot of teams that have ended up getting better. He's obviously gone to the wrong teams at times, obviously putting your faith in Alpine at one point, obviously then putting your faith in Aston Martin, who, don't get me wrong, provided a car in 2023, but ultimately, are Aston Martin anything special? In my opinion, no, especially not right now. Do I think they could be in a few years' time with Newey and the Honda Power Units? Absolutely. But I think the big question for that is all going to be, like, how long is Newey going to want to keep doing it? How important is the power unit going to be next year? Because if Honda don't get it right, you know that Mercedes, Ferrari will be pushing right there to make sure that it is right. And that's something which we're going to have to see over the course of the next few years. And I think with Fernando Alonso, obviously this season, how many points has he picked up this year? I'm not entirely sure. I don't think it's that many, in complete honesty. But it's one of those where it's really sort of difficult to see at what point. He's got 2 points, Fernando Alonso. It's really difficult to see where sort of Fernando Alonso finds that groundbreaking pace again, if that makes sense, where can potentially win races, get on the podium and things. And yes, that also comes with the car being good enough to be able to push you to that position, but also ultimately it has to come from the driver having the pace. And I think with a lot of drivers on the grid, they'll all probably turn around and argue that they have the pace if they had the car underneath them. And I agree with, for the most part, with most of them. And that's obviously something which Fernando will obviously look into heading into next season. But is it a deal which, obviously, I think Fernando's contract ends at the end of 2027, or it might be 26, but whatever. And that's something that he'll have to really contemplate, because if he doesn't sort of have the car, does he really want to be trundling around for 2 points when he's 45 years old and he could be at home chilling? Like, he's earned enough money nowadays, and he'll always have opportunities just based on his name, especially in Spain, to do things and maybe even work with teams in the future. He's obviously got his management team right now, which works with Gabi Bortoleto. I believe Sebastian Montoya in Formula 2's in there now as well. So you've obviously got that sort of conversation to have as well, where sort of Fernando Alonso has obviously started to look after his racing career like many other drivers have done at that, like before that sort of age. And that's obviously, in my opinion, the right thing to do for Fernando. And do I think he's going to be in the sport past for 2027? I genuinely believe everything depends on the power units. I think if the power units are shit, I think he'll announce his retirement right at the start of 2026, and I think he'll call it quits unless that Aston Martin is challenging for wins and podiums and things like that, because ultimately, at the end of the day, every driver wants to win races. And I've said it time and time again, like, there's certain drivers on this grid that have had Hall of Fame careers 3 times over, and that one being by the name of Lewis Hamilton. And Lewis Hamilton's rookie year alone, yes, he didn't win the championship, but that is a Hall of Fame year. His second year wins the championship, then does nothing for a few years. A few years later, then he goes and wins what should have been 5 in a row. If it wasn't for Mercedes reliability, Hamilton would have won 7 or 8 titles at Mercedes. And that's the big thing when you look at Fernando Alonso, is that he has hit numbers that most drivers won't even get anywhere close to. And he has to acknowledge that when he comes to the end of his career, because he has been a fantastic driver and he has had fantastic spells. But ultimately, at some point, you have to call it a day, because sometimes it's just not quite going the way you want it to. And obviously, at Aston Martin right now, that certainly isn't the way. Now, obviously, you can let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Who would Aston Martin replace Fernando Alonso with in 2027, should he decide to retire at the end of 2026? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you have not done so already, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, turn on that notification bell, and I'll catch you in another video later on.